Welcome, music theory students of Bingham High School, spring 2020. Here we are in Bingham's band room, and we're going to come up here and look at the board. We'll look at the board during the little lecture here as we also discuss what's presented in this little book here from the Army School of Music, which I attended back in Virginia a few years ago, but I think it presents well some things we need to learn about when we study form or phrases, because phrases, if we're looking at all the phrases and how they fit into a piece, helps us understand what the form of that piece and helps us do what we call formal analysis. So the first thing we need to talk about are motifs. I think that's how you pronounce it. If there are more than one, it's M-O-T-I-V-E-S. If there's just one, it's called a motif, M-O-T-I-F. And the definition that the Army book says, and it's a good one, it's a short musical figure, generally 2 or 3 notes in length. And a good example of that, here's a little, at least the rhythm of probably the most famous motif in the world. It's the Fate motif from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, first movement, which is bum, 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 bum. You've heard that at the beginning. It's the Fate motif. Churchill talked about that a little bit. I mean, Beethoven talked about it, and Churchill. So I'm going to play it for you on Graeber's little keyboard here, which is a major third, right? Even though the whole piece is in C minor. Just to review, intervals there, that's not a minor third, that's a major third. Okay, and so when we get several motifs put together, they form a phrase, a musical phrase, and it's defined in the book, and it's a good one, I like to use it, a short musical thought, normally 2 or 4 measures long. Okay, say that again, short musical thought, normally 2 or 4 measures long. And so if we think of the tune to Yankee Doodle Dandy, I'll go over and play it. The first, little pause in that is what we would call, the first phrase. So let's play it here. There's the first phrase. And that, kind of leaves you wondering, hey, what's going to happen next? Because you can't just end there, and we'll talk about what that means later. But here's the rest of it. And that sounds like a very complete thought, which it is, and we'll call that later on. We'll talk about it's a period. You have 2 phrases put together, forming about an 8-measure section of a tune. All right, so what a phrase does is it is like a sentence in speaking. So you could, or writing, you could, even have a comma in the sentence to create a pause. But anyway, this is what this says on the board. A phrase can be comparable to a clause or sentence in speaking or writing. And the purpose of phrases, or at least a phrase, is to usually build tension, or we might call that interest or excitement, to a climax point, which usually happens about 2/3 of the way through. Sometimes it's the highest note of the phrase, and then it resolves to a point of rest. Let me do that again. A phrase is used to usually build tension, in other words, interest or excitement, to a climax point, usually about 2/3 of the way through, or sometimes the highest note of the phrase, and that could be 2/3 of the way through, then resolves to a point of rest. So here we have a little phrase here, the first phrase of a piece. Take a look at it here. It's 4 measures long, and I'm asking you to sort of audiate that. That means, can you hear the notes? Can you hear those sounds in your head? Just be looking at it. This is an F major, 4/4 time. I'm going to play it for you in a minute, but there's the first measure, second measure, third measure. There's the high point. There's your climax point. Notice it's about 2/3 of the way through. and a point of rest. Get my finger in there. Yeah, there you go. Right there, point of rest, high point, the climax point, the beginning. So instead of singing it, I'm going to go play it over in the piano. Let me see if I can, here we go. All right, so there's a typical phrase. Now, when we do phrases, lots of times you have to have two of them together, just like we talked about in Yankee Doodle. So we have some types of phrases. The first one usually is what's called the antecedent. That's A-N-T-E-C-E-D-E-N-T. And we could liken this to a question in the English language. And as you know, questions end with demanding an answer, but same with the musical phrase. This little phrase right here is actually on your assignment of C-1 out of your workbook. Of course, I've added these Roman numerals, but here's 4 measures. See if you can audiate that for a minute. And we know that half cadences end on a 5. So here we have this first phrase, the antecedent, or the question, ending on a half cadence. So here we go, I'm going to play it for you. G major, 2/4 time, 1 and 2, and. Oop, let's go up an octave. Ready? And. I can't play today. Try it again. And. See, that cannot stand alone. It needs something else, like an answer. Let me play it one more time. All right, so the answer, or the second phrase, usually in a periodic structure, this is what we're talking about, and put these two phrases, a period, is called a consequent. Consequent is spelled C-O-N-S-E-Q-U-E-N-T. And again, this is like the answer to the question. And it usually, not always, but usually will end with a PAC, or a perfect authentic cadence, meaning it ends on a 1. And here it is written out. Here's the consequent. See if you can audiate that. Now I purposely left blank this note here and that note, because they're different than the ones up in the first phrase. This is creating a half cadence. This is going to be an authentic cadence, a perfect authentic cadence. Notice the 5/7 to give it strength, ending on a 1. Now I'm going to play it, see if you can fill in with your mind what the last 2 notes are going to be. Here we go. And. Let me play it again. See if you can guess what those last 2 notes are. You put the 2 together and you have a period, which are 2 phrases, an antecedent and a consequent. So there's the antecedent phrase. Here is the consequent phrase. Let me play the whole thing. 1 and 2 and. Down here. All right. So hopefully that gives you an idea what that sounds like. I'm going to put some chords to it. Let me put this, let me put it right here on my stand. I don't know if that's filming. The floor, let me put that up a little bit. Going over to the piano. Go down. G major, the 1 chord is a G chord. The minor 6 is going to be an A minor chord. It's not a minor 6. It's a minor 2 chord. There we go. So it sounds like this. time. Okay. All right, so let me review that again. Oops, how did this do? There we go. Okay, I had it on reverse. Okay, I before had a minor 6 here, and that's wrong. Somehow I thought it was C major, but it's not. It's G major. So that was a G major chord, A minor chord here, then another G chord right here, and then a D chord being the 5 chord right there. Half cadence, antecedent phrase. Next phrase, the consequence. G major chord, A minor chord, G major chord for 1 beat, a D7 chord, okay, for the 5/7, and then a 1. And of course, hopefully you've figured out that this is an A, 8th note, G right here, second line from the bottom, as the final note of the piece. All right, now we're going to talk about phrase constructions, and there's 2 types: parallel and contrasting. Parallel is defined as follows. Now, hopefully you can read my writing, but I'll translate it for you. When the antecedent and consequent, I've abbreviated those, so again, when the antecedent and consequent are similar in melodic contour and rhythmic contract. Said that wrong. Content. In melodic contour and rhythmic content. Okay? And usually, as in the case here, the second phrase is a sequence of the first. So we might even call these types of phrase constructions, and then parallel, actually identical. Notice how the antecedent in this phrase does this. Ba-dee-da-da-da-da-dee-dee-da-da-dum. And the second phrase, da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-dee-dum. Then it's only different from that one by 2 notes. Dum-dum. A, G. So those right there are parallel phrases, okay? And we could even call these identical, almost, okay? And then there's contrasting, where the second phrase would be totally different than the first. So let me look here in the book. Sorry. We have here a good example of is this it? Yeah. Oh, this is going right here. This little tune right here, 8 measures long, is 8 measures long. Here's the antecedent, here's the consequent. Now they look very similar, but they're not the same notes. This is down a third, but still would be considered parallel. I'm going to try to play it for you. In fact, I'm going to bring it over here. Hopefully no mistakes. Here we go. 2 flats. That's the antecedent. Here's the consequent. Okay, so not exactly identical, but quite similar, or we would say parallel. Now, this one down here, this is an example of a contrasting period, or contrasting, two contrasting period phrases. This is a little more involved. It's got 5 flats. There's the antecedent, and right underneath is the consequent. I'm going to try to play it. 1, 2, and 3, 4. All right. Okay, so as we can see, both of these examples, show two phrases that are parallel, again, where you see them similar in melodic contour and rhythmic content. And then, of course, the contrasting one, little or no similarity. And in the book, one more time, we're going to look here. If you have two periods together, we call it a double period, which would make it 16 bars long. There's one right there on the right side. There's a double, parallel double period. That's what it says down there. And on this page, we have a contrasting double period. So I forgot to put the key signature on those two lines. And that's going to end it for today. Hope all is well, and we'll probably do another one of these next week.